Okay, hi there. This is a really simple overview of key topic 2, the Cuban Missile Crisis. There'll be another one for Berlin and for the Prague Spring. As you can see, I've broken it down into cause, events and consequences, and at the bottom, importance. So obviously consequences is going to be a key question that could come up, as is importance. There's vodcasts on how to answer those questions on my channel. So let's get started and let's have a look at first off why it happened. Well, there was a revolution in Cuba. The previous leader, a guy called Batista, he was really taking a lot of influence from the Americans, but the country was quite poor. America was getting lots of the wealth from it, so there was a revolution led by a man called Castro. Now, because he was perceived to be a communist, the Americans had nothing to do with him and turned their backs on him. So Castro turned to communism after the US relations got worse. The Americans tried a number of times to try and kill him, but in the end the CIA backed a group of Cuban exiles to invade Cuba in 1961 in what became known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now it failed. Castro wasn't overthrown, but he was so scared about what had happened, he went to seek support from the Soviet Union, asking them for military assistance. And this is where you see the key events, because Khrushchev sees an opportunity. Cuba is just 90 miles away from the American coast. So Khrushchev thinks, I'm going to put nuclear missiles there. And it's this thing called brinkmanship. You know, can you basically get America to back down? Especially because America had nuclear missiles in places like Turkey and Italy, which are quite near the Soviet Union's southern border. Now, US spy planes photograph the missile sites. It creates massive problems for the Americans to have a Soviet missile base so near. Kennedy, he creates a group called EXCOM, the Executive Committee, to find a solution to this problem. And after a few options of, airstrikes and invasion or do nothing, they come up with a blockade, a naval blockade with warships, stopping any more ships, Soviet Union ships, from taking equipment to the island of Cuba. And it creates a standoff, and the world waits with bated breath. Will this be a war? In the end, secret messages are passed between Kennedy and Khrushchev, and publicly Khrushchev sends 2 telegrams. First one says, if you promise not to invade Cuba, I'll remove the missiles. The second one says, well, hold on, if you promise not to invade Cuba and you get rid of your missiles in Turkey, I'll get rid of my missiles in Cuba. Secretly, they agree to option 2, but Kennedy says publicly he agrees to option 1. Now, therefore, Kennedy and Khrushchev make a secret deal to remove the missiles in exchange for US missiles out of Turkey. But the American missiles in Turkey were taken out secretly. So what were the consequences? Well, the first consequence was a hotline was created between the Soviet Union and the United States, but this is because they relied on telegrams, and you wanted to be able to get more a sense of how people were thinking by hearing their voices rather than simply relying on a telegram. Kennedy was seen as a world statesman, a world leader, because it appeared like he'd got Khrushchev to back down. Khrushchev, on the other hand, was seen as weak because he'd moved his missiles publicly, whereas Kennedy had been able to remove his in secret. Now, in the longer term, you then saw a limited test ban treaty where they stopped testing nuclear weapons, with the exception of, I think it was under the sea testing. And they also said there was an outer space treaty in 1967 which said they were not going to allow nuclear weapons in space. The other thing they did was the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, which said that they would not allow other nations to develop nuclear weapons. This was because they realized how close they'd come to a nuclear war. Now, with regards to importance, it led both sides to realizing how close they came to a nuclear war. A really good example is that Kennedy made a speech where he talked about the common interests between the Soviet Union and the United States. So it made them realize that they needed to avoid any examples of this kind of crisis. Another importance was it showed that this policy of brinkmanship, this idea of you create a crisis to get the other side to back down, was flawed. And this can be seen therefore to lead to détente, where the Americans and the Soviet Union decided to not become friends, but just to reduce the tensions. Well, got it done in just over 5 minutes, but if you have any queries, there's other videos that do it in a lot more detail on the channel. Any queries, please feel free to reply, and thanks for listening.